My name is Amanda. I am a 31-year-old registered nurse who finally bought my first home after a decade of saving every penny. My relationship with my family has always been close but complicated, especially with my brother, Jason, who has never understood responsibility. When my parents unexpectedly sold our childhood home, I was shocked. But nothing prepared me for the betrayal that followed when they showed up at my door with suitcases in hand, acting like it was their own. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever had a loved one cross a personal line. Growing up in a modest suburban home, our family of four seemed normal from the outside. My parents, Martha and Frank, had steady jobs that ensured a middle-class lifestyle. My dad worked as an accountant for a local firm, and my mom taught third grade at an elementary school about 2 miles from home. We didn't have lavish vacations or fancy cars, but we always had enough. From a young age, I noticed the difference in abilities and expectations between my brother Jason and me, despite our age difference of only 3. When Jason forgot his homework, Mom would rush to school to bring it to him. When he dropped out of baseball because he started practice too early, Dad would just nod and say, "Play something else next year." But when I asked to drop piano lessons to join the science club, I got a long scolding for being persistent and responsible. This pattern continued throughout high school. Jason barely graduated, and I maintained a 4.0 GPA while working weekends at a pharmacy. When college application season came, my parents seemed surprised that I wanted to be a nurse. "Why not choose an easier major?" Mom said. She thought medicine was too hard. Meanwhile, they paid for Jason's first semester at community college, which he dropped out after 8 weeks, then for a 3-month apprenticeship, which he also dropped out of. Each time, they'd send him home with a sympathetic smile and a delicious meal, while I paid for my own tuition with scholarships, loans, and a 30-hour week at a 24/7 diner. The night shift was tough, juggling school and clinical practice, but I was determined. My parents came to my graduation, but their congratulations seemed half-hearted as they were more excited when Jason landed his first steady job at a car dealership at age 26 after years of bouncing around from low-paying jobs. After college, I lived in a small one-room apartment and started working at Memorial Hospital in the ICU, often working overtime to pay off my student loans and save for the family. I saved what I could each month, sometimes just a few $100,000, sometimes more when I worked holidays and overtime. Jason was coming home for the 4th time after being laid off from the dealership. He had a nice car, which my parents often mentioned when I expressed concern about his job. "At least I'll have a decent ride to interviews," my mom said conveniently, forgetting that they'd sponsored his car. It took me 7 years of strict savings and frugal living to get the deposit. By then I had moved into a slightly larger one-bedroom apartment, but still had dated furniture and cooked for myself. Any surplus went into my housing fund. When I started looking at houses, I focused on smaller ones in good neighborhoods with easy access to the hospital. The housing market was tough, and I failed 3 times before I found one. It wasn't big, nor was it new, but it had its own character. It had a small yard and 3 bedrooms. What was special was that the previous owner, Eleanor, 84, was a retired nurse who had lived in the house for 40 years. With arthritis, she could no longer climb stairs. When the agent mentioned the young nurse interested in buying the house, she invited me over for tea. We connected immediately. She showed me pictures of her when she was still in her white uniform until she retired. She felt secure knowing her house was in the hands of someone who appreciated the care she received. Even though someone offered $5,000 more, she chose me. The day I got the keys was the proudest moment of my life. I stood in the middle of the empty living room, sunlight streaming through the windows, filled with emotion. This was mine. Every double shift, every dinner party, every birthday that required a Home Depot coupon for clothes and jewelry had led to this moment. The first month, I painted and decorated the house, making it truly mine. The first thing I bought was a 6-person dining set. Because no matter what, I value family. I invited my parents and Jason to my first formal meal at home, cooking Mom's famous lasagna as a gesture of gratitude, though their support was always patchy. The first few months of hosthood were a series of weekly Sunday family dinners. Jason occasionally canceled at the last minute or showed up late, and my parents rarely missed. Over these meals, I noticed a change in their demeanor. Dad seemed more stressed, often checking his phone and taking calls outside. Mom talked in circles about retirement and rising costs. When asked directly about finances, they dodged. I told myself, they're old and they should worry about retirement. Little did I know that these were the signs of betrayal that would shake up our lives and test our sense of family loyalty. Sunday changed everything and started off normal. I prepared a full pot roast, set the table with cutlery I'd bought at a discount at the big box store, and bought a bottle of wine my dad liked. The doorbell rang, and I thought about the usual greetings and conversation. But Mom was unusually quiet, Dad was frantic. Jason texted 30 minutes late, saying there was traffic even though the roads were clear when I went shopping. We made small talk about the weather and my promotion to shift leader while we waited for Jason. When he arrived, he looked unusual, a little arrogant. He was wearing a fancy watch and said he was looking at apartments in Lakeside Towers, a luxury condo that cost twice as much as I was paying each month. Big news, Dad announced after everyone helped themselves to their food. We've decided to sell. I stopped holding my fork. Sold our hometown home of more than 25 years. Why? I asked, my sense of taste gone. It's just time, Mom said, not looking at me. The neighborhood's changing, 2-story houses are hard to get around. Dad nodded vigorously. The market's good. The broker said we could sell for top dollar. I turned to Jason, expecting to be as surprised as I was, but he was calm. When are we moving? I asked. We've accepted the offer, closing in 3 weeks, Mom forced a smile. 3 weeks? It felt like the floor was falling out from under us. Where will we live? Will we find a new place? We're thinking about it, Dad said coolly. We can rent for now, then we'll settle down. A sense of unease settled in. My parents planned down to the last detail. How could they sell a house without knowing where they were going to live? I offered to help them find an apartment, including one for people over 55 with good amenities near me. Mom said no, we're not that old. We don't need a nursing home. I clarified that I didn't mean a nursing home, but a building with amenities for seniors. Just think, Dad said, commandingly. Which meant definitely not thinking. Finally Jason said, we know what they're doing. Don't interfere. The words cut deep, because I just wanted to help. They avoided answering questions for the rest of the meal, leaving early with the excuse that they were tired. My fear grew like a rock. 3 days later, I got a call from Diane, my mom's old teaching friend who had retired to Florida. She said she heard my parents were selling my house. Mom said they were moving down to a smaller house, but no one knew it would happen so quickly. I was still struggling to understand. Diane hesitated. At least Jason is well arranged, I'm glad. I held the phone tightly. What do you mean? Diane took a deep breath and said Mom said they were helping Jason financially. I snickered inside. The new watch, the fancy apartment, the angry attitude all along, all the pieces were revealed. I called Tara, a banker. Using my knowledge but knowing it was sensitive, I asked, if someone sold a paid-off house in Oakwood Heights, how much would they get? Tara didn't hesitate, between $280,000 and $300,000, depending on the house and the lot. The answer was a punch. My parents' house wasn't fancy, but it had been paid off long ago, and the land prices were rising. I went to Jason's house this weekend, the apartment he'd rented for the past 3 years, simple, old. I needed to confront him. Moved to Lakeside? I asked sharply. Yeah, just signed the contract yesterday. 35th floor, nice river view. Rent is probably $3,000 a month, I said. It's a good deal. Jason was a sales representative for a brewery, and I knew he couldn't afford such a fancy house. I know your parents gave you money. Jason's reaction turned to defiance. Adults. They want me to succeed. The $280,000 isn't a favor. It's their entire retirement account. Jason retorted, a little embarrassed. Not really. They still have some left. He was pursuing several uncertain business ventures, even quitting his job as a sales representative. I judged, what are you doing with the money that made your parents withdraw from their retirement account? He avoided eye contact. Hard to say. Do they have plans to live with me? He said softly that they planned to live with me temporarily. That was like a bucket of cold water. They were living with me without asking. It was better for them to say it than to leave it at that. I went to my parents' house and saw a red for sale sign. They admitted that they had given Jason a lot of money, but they had nowhere to go, and they planned to rely on me. The long betrayal was so deep because they had given Jason a lot of money and expected me to be a solid support. And yet, they never asked me a single question. They thought so little of me that they thought I had to accept it. A week later, my parents arrived at my house early in the morning, carrying suitcases and a pickup truck full of belongings parked at the curb. Surprise, my mother said, forcing joy. I froze in the doorway, my mind racing. They had moved a ton of stuff into my living room, swapped out my personal belongings, replaced my favorite bed sheets with ones they brought with them, and taken over my living space. My mother had arbitrarily changed the layout of the kitchen, and even judged me for not having arranged it properly. I gritted my teeth and endured. At night, the strange commotion in the house kept me awake, but I told myself it was only temporary. Day after day, they seemed to take over the house. Dad brought friends over to watch sports, leaving behind piles of booze and dirty food. Mom disrupted her carefully planned diet. I tried to set rules, but they ignored me. You're always at work, we're just here to help. Stress made me take the wrong medicine at work. The director noticed and asked about my home life. I avoided the matter, only talking about family matters. I was even more tired when I came home from work without a quiet corner, and I was also stressed. The climax was the day after losing a patient, which was rare. I just wanted to take a hot bath, have a glass of wine and be quiet." The house was full of strangers. They had invited a church group to eat, 16 people I didn't know, wandering around the house, using my dishes and chopsticks, destroying my personal space. I sneaked up to my room and found that someone had entered my bedroom, changed the furniture, and put in old sheets, against my will. When I questioned my mother, she quietly said she just wanted to help. I wanted my privacy respected. My mother cried and called me difficult to satisfy my family's feelings. A few days later, my office was turned into Jason's bedroom with a bed made, my desk pushed to a corner, and my school supplies packed in boxes. My father did not hesitate. "I let Jason stay there when he comes to visit." I stood there speechless. Jason called over the weekend to ask about the house renovation to make a room for him. I was tired, busy with work, and didn't want to see him. He said my mom told me I had prepared a room for him. My mom made the decision without asking me. He asked me to be patient. "The parents need to be taken care of" statement sounded sarcastic in his words, because they gave him money and I was the one who suffered the consequences. I said bluntly, "The money they gave you is enough to buy a house, and you live in a fancy apartment, while I have to reluctantly live with them." He was angry. "I didn't force my parents to come to your house. That's your business." I ended the call knowing the battle was going on. 3 days later, I came home to find a locksmith changing the lock on the front door. "What's going on?" I snapped. The locksmith said he had been ordered to change the lock by my father, even though he had no authority. I called my father, and he said he was only changing it because my mother often lost her keys. I angrily asked him to stop and made it clear that this was my property, not my grandparents'. After a tense confrontation with my parents, they laughed and said that the house was now a family home. It was clear to me that they disregarded my ownership rights by bloodline, claiming that they had the right to own the house even though there was no contract. I knew that soft words weren't enough. I had to take decisive action to regain control of my place before I lost both my home and my peace of mind. I called a lawyer friend, Sarah, who specializes in property law, and explained everything. Sarah said I had every right as a landlord and the legal basis to ask my parents to leave immediately. If they didn't leave, I would have to go through formal eviction proceedings, as heartbreaking as that would be for everyone. I still love them, but I can't let them take advantage of my kindness and dominate my life. Sarah advised me to keep evidence of everything and find a family mediator. I also contacted Lisa, my mother's cousin, who was always objective. Lisa said that on the family level, people misunderstood the situation. My mother said that they lent Jason small amounts of money and helped me pay off the mortgage, which was completely untrue. Thanks to Lisa, I started to straighten out the story with my relatives. I also met with a financial expert to find solutions for my parents, from renting a subsidized house to increasing their pension early. Although they had to change their living habits, they did not become homeless or miserable as imagined. While they were out, I installed security cameras, changed the Wi-Fi password, took pictures, and listed valuable assets to protect my rights. I also went to therapy with Dr. Myers to learn how to maintain boundaries and reduce the guilt I felt about not being able to meet my family's demands. She described the situation as a family role pattern. I was being placed in the role of caregiver and Jason was allowed to depend on me. But I wasn't a servant, I was a daughter. I needed to protect my autonomy. I drafted an official letter to my parents, giving them a full 30-day deadline to move out. I helped them with the deposit and first month's rent to move into their new rental. The day before the family meeting with a professional mediator, I placed chairs in a circle to break down the traditional power structure and allow everyone to have equal dialogue. My parents arrived first, surprised to see strangers. Jason arrived late, acting like this was normal. The mediator introduced himself, reminded me of the rules. Everyone was free to speak frankly, no attacks, and focused on solutions. I explained how they had turned my life upside down since they arrived. I expressed my hurt that they had taken the house I had bought with my hard work and without asking. My parents argued that they had raised me and had every right to do so. I said that the sacrifice did not mean I owed them the house or lost my freedom. Jason said he did not ask them for money, but I knew he took it to live away. The mediator asked about the misunderstanding and their plans after selling the house. My parents did not admit to having any plans of their own. In fact, they planned to live with me forever. They gave Jason more assets than I thought, even withdrawing his pension early and facing penalties, to take care of his brother. When I asked Jason about the money, he avoided explaining. I presented documents and suggested suitable housing options for my parents, and gave them a 30-day notice to move. The reaction was fierce. Mom cried, Dad blamed me for being heartless. Jason sat quietly watching the drama. The conversation dragged on, but in the end Jason offered to contribute $1,000 a month to help his parents rent a house. They agreed to leave. I helped find a house and pay for the moving. During this time, my parents' atmosphere changed from indifference to crying and begging. I held my ground with psychological support. The day they moved out, the atmosphere was heavy. Their new apartment was smaller, but clean and safe thanks to Jason's contribution to the rent. Mom wrote after 6 months, suggesting coffee, talking to a counselor, admitting that my parents were wrong to lean on me without permission. We began to mend our ways with clearer rules. A year later, things settled down. Mom and Dad had their own lives. Mom was involved in club activities. Dad was happily working part-time. Jason was back at his regular job, still providing financial support. My family was still tense but civil. I had my own workspace back, my own living room, and most importantly, I learned that love doesn't mean sacrificing happiness and personal boundaries. If you are going through something similar, remember that you have the right to protect your family and set clear boundaries. Sometimes, being assertive about setting boundaries is the best thing for any relationship, no matter how difficult it may feel at the time. Thank you for listening to my story. Please share your experiences in the comments below if you have set difficult boundaries with your family. Don't forget to like if you agree with my decision and follow for more stories about complicated family relationships.